The room was too bright for morning. Fluorescent lights scraped across polished glass and the reflection of faces that pretended to listen. Every screen around the table displayed the same title, Project Phoenix, Infrastructure Redefined. The word redefined pulsed faintly in Helios blue. I had written that title line in the code header 6 months ago, when this project was still called Helios Core Optimization. Now it belonged to someone else. My name had disappeared from every file, every presentation, every trace that linked effort to identity. Only the structure remained, the skeleton of my labor wearing another man's smile. Adrian Keller was talking again. His voice carried through the glass walls with the ease of money and inheritance. He moved between slides as if conducting an orchestra that played a song I had composed but never performed. Phoenix is the future of Helios systems, he declared. It's modular, self-healing, and built to scale without failure. I counted the seconds between his pauses. He had memorized my documentation, even the way I phrased warnings. When he said, self-healing, I saw the lines of recursive checks I had written at 3 a.m. while the city slept. He had no idea what they meant beyond how impressive they sounded. The board members nodded in rhythm. One of them whispered the word, brilliant. I wondered if anyone noticed that his cursor shook slightly when he switched slides. They mistook it for enthusiasm. I saw panic disguised as charm. The CEO, Robert Keller, smiled at his son as if watching prophecy unfold. He leaned back in the chair that used to belong to the previous vice president, the one who had retired early. Every corner of this building echoed the same story, talent replaced by bloodline. When the meeting ended, chairs scraped the floor and conversations split into fragments, investors, projections, champagne promises. I stayed seated, staring at the frozen image on the screen, the architecture diagram I had built line by line. The labels had been changed, but the logic was mine, every decision born from nights that stretched too long. Adrian turned at the doorway. Magnolia, can you stay a moment? I met his reflection in the screen instead of his eyes. Of course. He waited until the room was empty. Great work on keeping things stable these last few months. I know the transition hasn't been easy, but from now on, I'll need you to focus on support tasks. We'll handle direction at the executive level. Support. A word meant to shrink you. Sure, I said. My voice didn't break. It never does. He smiled as if he'd done something kind, then left, whistling an off-key tune. The silence that followed felt clean. I could hear the faint hum of the servers beneath the floor, like heartbeats trapped under glass. I walked closer to the screen and traced a single node of the network map with my fingertip. Beneath the artificial polish of their new colors, I could still feel the bones of my system. At my desk, I tried to log into the main repository. The message blinked once, calm and read, access revoked by executive request. For a long time, I simply watched the line pulse. Each flash felt like a slow exhale. Then I leaned back and closed my eyes. It didn't feel like betrayal anymore. It felt like confirmation of something I had already known. People rarely notice when they erase the quiet ones. They believe silence means acceptance, but silence is just time collecting interest. I opened my secondary terminal, the one they didn't know existed. It hummed alive, independent of Helios's control. I scrolled through the last commit logs, proof of everything I had done. My fingerprint still lived there in syntax, indentation, comments. My presence was still inside the machine, and the machine still answered to me. Outside the office windows, San Francisco blurred into a cold sheet of light. The morning fog hung low, a soft curtain between what was real and what was seen. I liked it that way. Visibility was overrated. At lunch, people congratulated Adrian. The rumor spread fast. Helios had secured a meeting with a new investor group. I nodded when someone mentioned bonuses. My coffee tasted burnt. In the afternoon, I attended another meeting. Adrian explained my algorithms with bright hand gestures, mispronouncing half the technical terms. The board didn't notice. They liked confidence more than comprehension. When he mentioned that my team had optimized the system, everyone laughed politely. I was the only one from that team left. After work, I waited until the elevators stopped opening. The office after midnight belonged to me again. I liked how the fluorescent light softened at that hour, how the hum of the air conditioning filled the space where people's voices used to be. I walked through the server room, touching each rack as if greeting an old friend. These machines had seen me cry once. They had heard me curse and pray in the same breath. They had also kept my secrets. I whispered, "Still breathing?" The server lights blinked in sequence, green then blue, like an answer. I pulled a chair close to the nearest rack and sat. My reflection in the polished metal looked both younger and older at once. The screen beside me showed the heartbeat of the network, steady, loyal, unaware of politics. I reached out to the keyboard, typed a single line of command, then stopped. I wasn't ready to move yet. I wanted to feel this moment stretch, to remember what the world felt like before everything changed. Someone once told me that the opposite of visibility isn't invisibility. It's autonomy. Maybe that's what I had been searching for all along. The city outside was sleeping. Inside, I stayed awake, surrounded by the rhythm of machines that still carried my name in every function call. I stayed there long enough for the hum of the servers to become a single note, low and endless. The glow from the panels painted the floor in narrow blue veins. Somewhere in that quiet, I realized I was no longer angry. Anger would have meant I still believed they could see me. What I felt was simpler, cleaner, almost mathematical, a problem to be solved with precision. When I finally stood, my reflection followed me across the glass doors. My hair was a mess, my eyes a shade too tired to belong to the image of competence they loved showing on company brochures. The corridor outside was deserted. I could hear the ocean faintly through the ventilation system, a reminder that this city never truly slept, it only changed shifts. I walked past the office of Adrian Keller. The lights inside were still on. His desk was covered with printed slides from the presentation, each page marked with red pen notes. I stepped closer and saw my own diagrams under his scribbles. He had changed the variable names to make them look new: Helios Link, Adrian Method, Keller Route. A childish effort. On the corner of his desk sat a framed photograph of him with his father at some golf course, both wearing matching smiles. I stared at it for a while. Nepotism always had perfect teeth. Back at my workstation, I opened the terminal again. The logs glowed faintly, like embers refusing to die. I ran a small script that listed every subsystem I had touched in the past 5 years. The screen filled with endless lines, authentication nodes, cache clusters, deployment threads, my fingerprints everywhere. If they wanted to erase me, they would have to rebuild the entire backbone from scratch. I thought about deleting everything. One command and the empire would vanish. But destruction was too easy, too loud. What interested me was something subtler, the elegance of silence. Systems collapse faster when they think they are safe. At 2:45 a.m., I made myself another coffee from the stale machine near the elevator. It tasted like burnt circuits. I drank it anyway. The bitterness helped me think. I opened a new document on my private drive and titled it Mirror Build. I started copying each line of configuration from memory. Every folder name, every dependency, every invisible rule I had created to make Helios work without error. The new environment was not theft, it was preservation. A museum of truth that existed outside their control. As I typed, I remembered the first day I joined Helios. The building had smelled of new paint and ambition. They called it a startup then, all excitement and caffeine. I believed them when they said teamwork mattered. For years, I believed it. Now the same building felt colder, the kind of place that keeps trophies instead of people. When I finished the initial setup, I leaned back. The new system purred to life on my personal cloud account. It was small, almost fragile, but it was mine. I watched the terminal feed scroll pass like rain, each line a heartbeat reconnecting to me. Outside, dawn began to bleed through the fog. The first buses hissed along the street. I packed my bag slowly. The office looked different in early light, stripped of pretense. Without the crowd, it was just glass and steel, hollow and echoing. On my way out, I noticed the cleaning crew moving quietly through the hallway. One of them nodded to me. "Working late?" he asked. "Just finishing something," I said. He smiled in the way strangers do when they see exhaustion they recognize. "People upstairs don't know half the work that happens down here," he muttered, pushing his cart past me. His words stayed with me all the way to the parking lot. In the car, I rolled down the window. The wind carried the salt of the bay. I watched the first light strike the Helios logo on the top floor, turning the silver letters to gold. It was beautiful, the kind of beauty that hides decay beneath polish. I thought of the system humming inside, still running on the logic I had built, unaware that its creator was already gone in every official sense. It would keep running for now. That was the genius of it. My work was designed to survive abandonment. Before driving home, I opened my laptop one last time and looked at the mirrored environment again. It was stable, clean, ready. There was a strange calm in me then, the kind that comes after a decision has already been made somewhere deep in the bones, long before the mind dares to name it. They had wanted control. I had given them the illusion of it. As I closed the lid, the reflection of my face merged with the faint glow of the city behind me. For the first time in years, I felt invisible and free at the same moment. Morning traffic began to hum around me, another system waking up, another set of people convinced they understood their own machines. I smiled, a small, private curve of the lips. By the time I reached the bridge, the sun had risen completely. The skyline of Helios shrank in the rearview mirror until it became just another line of light, distant and fragile. In that mirror, I saw the woman they thought they could erase, still here, still breathing. And somewhere beneath that skyline, the foundation waited, loyal only to me. I whispered into the wind, barely louder than the engine, "Let's see how well they function without their ghost." Then I drove on, into the morning that didn't yet know what it owed me. The morning after the long night, I arrived before everyone else. The atrium smelled faintly of citrus and clean glass. A mural on the far wall proclaimed the values of Helios in tall white letters: integrity, vision, merit. I had walked under those words for 5 years and never asked why they felt like promises made to someone else. The elevators opened on the 9th floor with a delicate chime. I liked the way the office sounded before keyboards woke and voices multiplied. The servers purred beneath the floor like something sleeping with one eye open. I set my coffee down, woke my screen, and watched the empty inbox breathe for a single calm minute. Then the messages arrived in a sudden rush. A calendar invite that did not include me, a thread about Phoenix that mentioned my work without my name, a document link that said access denied. I clicked again. Access denied. A third time. Access denied. I leaned back and studied the ceiling. The panels were arranged in perfect squares. Somewhere behind them, the building exhaled warm air in carefully measured breaths. I could trace the ducts by sound if I tried. I could picture the path of each cable. My mind did this on its own, mapping and remapping everything into a structure I could hold. A small cough came from behind me. I turned to see a young assistant carrying a stack of glossy binders. She smiled with that quick, busy kindness of people who run other people's mornings. "Good to see you," she said. "Could you drop these at the support desk?" I looked at the binders. Phoenix Technical Overview, my diagrams on the covers styled in Helios blue. "I do not work at the support desk," I said. "Oh," she replied, surprised. "I thought you were support for engineering." She blushed. "I am sorry, I just started." "It is all right," I said, and took the binders from her hands. They were heavier than they looked. After she left, I placed them gently on Adrian's empty chair and returned to my screen. A new email arrived from Human Resources. The subject line was cheerful, the way bandages sometimes come in bright colors. Organizational update. I opened it and found my name relocated 2 levels down the diagram, reporting to someone who had once asked me how to open the terminal. The description of my role had changed by a few words that carried a quiet knife: maintenance specialist, continuity support. The sentence that used to say strategic ownership now said daily execution. No one had spoken to me about this. It was easier not to. When you want to erase a person, you begin with their title and work your way toward their face. I read the message twice, then a third time, as if repetition could reveal a hidden clause that made it less true. There was nothing hidden, only the neat clarity of a decision already made. I closed the email and stood. The morning light slanted across the carpet in thin gold lines. I walked to the window and looked down at the street. Delivery trucks were backing into the loading bay. A bicyclist waited at a red light. An old man in a blue cap fed crumbs to the same 2 pigeons I saw every day on the low wall. The city kept its promises to the ordinary. Behind me, the door opened. Adrian entered with a bright voice and a pleasant smell of cologne that tried too hard. "Big day," he said, dropping his leather bag onto the chair. "Investors at 10. We are doing the final walkthrough at 9:30. He tugged at his cuffs and faced the window like a man who liked reflections. "I need you to prepare a short summary for the junior team. Simplify the authentication flow. Pretend you are explaining it to someone who does not code. Keep it clean and friendly." "It is already documented," I said. "Then document it again," he replied, flashing the smile that meant he believed charm was the same as authority. "We are streamlining, no confusion. Also, your access to the main repository is temporarily restricted. I signed off on a tighter permission model. Nothing personal, we just want a clear chain of command." "Clarity is good," I said. "Exactly," he answered, relieved I agreed with his favorite word. "You have always been a team player, Magnolia. That is what I admire about you." He admired many things when they remained invisible. "Anything else?" I asked. "Yes," he said. When the investors are here, try to keep a low profile. We do not want too many technical voices speaking at once. It dilutes the message. If something breaks, you will be right outside. Otherwise, let me take the lead. If something breaks, I repeated. It will not, he said and adjusted his tie. But if it does, you will fix it. That is what you do. He left whistling. The room felt larger without him, like an empty stage after the actor exits and the set remembers what it is. I stood quietly and let his words settle. There is a kind of subtraction that does not scream. It just removes you one permission at a time until you own only your labor and none of its meaning. By 9, people were at their desks. I walked the length of the floor and nodded when colleagues looked up. Some smiled, some looked away. 2 engineers who owed their jobs to my late-night fixes did not meet my eyes. Courage is often loud in meetings and very quiet in hallways. Near the end of the corridor, I passed the glass wall of the executive conference room. Inside, Adrian rehearsed his lines to the empty chairs. He ran the presentation like an actor tasting applause in advance. He liked the slide where my architecture diagram curved in a clean arc across the screen. His face was soft and bright as it reflected back at him. I watched for a moment and felt nothing at all. Back at my desk, I opened a blank document and began the summary he had requested. I wrote like I was writing to a stranger I wanted to protect. Clear sentences, calm verbs. I removed the poetry of the system and left only the map. Explain the idea, name the parts, show the sequence. Do not add yourself. Halfway through, I stopped and lifted my fingers from the keyboard. I realized I was breathing too shallow, like the room had tilted without warning. I set my palms on the desk and waited for the floor to find me again. It did slowly, like a friend returning. I saved the file and sent it to the junior team. A thank you came back immediately with too many exclamation marks. I answered with a single period. Then I opened the logs one more time on my private screen and listened for the quiet messages a system sends when the people who depend on it stop paying attention. The messages were there. They always were for those who could hear. A mild delay on a regional cache. A redundant call that ate time but not resources. A queue that would later become a bottleneck if fed the wrong traffic at the wrong hour. The system had started to speak in warnings, and no one was listening. At noon, I went outside and walked once around the block. The air tasted of ocean metal and roasted coffee and rain that would never arrive. I stopped at the corner and watched tourists photograph the building like it meant success. I wondered how many names were hiding in those windows, how many quiet hands held other people's certainty in place. When I returned to my desk, a new email waited. It was from the chief technology officer. She was a woman whose eyes missed very little. Her message was short. Can you stop by my office at 2? I went at 2. She closed the door with a careful motion that said she had practiced not alarming people. She remained standing, perhaps to keep the conversation quick. I know about the permission change, she said without preface. I did not sign it. I also know you built the core of Phoenix. I have known it for a long time. Thank you, I said. I cannot reverse the political decisions, she continued, eyes steady. Not today, not before the investors arrive, but I want you to hear this from me. You are not invisible to everyone. I held the edge of the chair lightly. I appreciate that, I said. She looked like she wanted to say more. There was a softness at the edges of her mouth that did not match the steel of her job. At last she asked, are you planning anything that will hurt the company? There it was, the question careful people ask when they suspect a quiet person has started counting. I am planning to do my work, I said. And what is your work? She asked. To let systems behave exactly as they were designed, I said. Her expression did not change, but something behind it seemed to understand. If you need anything, she said, document it. I always do, I replied. I left her office and returned to mine. The day moved forward like a slow conveyor belt carrying a fragile object toward a place where hands would pretend to be ready. I watched the sunlight slide across my desk and turn my empty coffee cup into a small, bright glass. At 5, I shut my screen and sat without moving. The office buzzed around me. Laughter near the elevators. A meeting rolling over its time in the corner room. The smell of reheated food. The ordinary insisted on itself. The ordinary always does. I waited until the floor was almost empty, then opened my private terminal and read the logs again. The numbers swung into alignment like constellations snapping into meaning. A picture formed that matched the feeling in my chest. The system would hold through the night. It would hold in the morning. It would hold until it met the condition written into its bones. I closed the lid and listened to the room breathe. The subtraction was almost complete. They had taken the title, the access, the credit. They had not taken the architecture. They could not. It lived in my hands and in the quiet. On my way out, I passed the support desk. The binders I had set on Adrian's chair were now stacked neatly in a metal tray. Someone had added a blue ribbon to the top binder. I touched the ribbon and felt the smoothness of its surface. Integrity, vision, merit. The mural in the atrium waited for me at the exit, untroubled by the night. I pressed my palm lightly against the glass door and stepped into the dark outside, where the city kept track of those who built it by watching only the lights they left on. The night security guard greeted me by name as I came back from dinner. He always did, a habit from months when I lived more in this building than in my apartment. He asked if it would be a long one. I said I did not know. That was true. Some nights stretch because of work. Some nights stretch because of choice. The floor was almost empty. A single cleaner moved slowly with a quiet vacuum, careful around chair legs as if they were sleeping animals. The office looked like a stage after the audience goes home. Everyone imagines a stage is loud, yet once the lights lower it becomes a study in breath. I sat and listened to the building inhale and exhale. An unread message waited in my inbox with the subject Final Investor Deck. I clicked it and watched the slide thumbnails march down the sidebar. Targets, timeline, cost curves, a swelling promise of return. Then the org chart, glassy and neat, names nested inside boxes like dolls inside larger dolls. Adrian at the top of engineering, a few directors below, a cluster of managers under them. I ran my eyes over each box until there were no boxes left. My name was not missing. It had been removed. That is a different verb. There was a thin note at the bottom of the org slide. To avoid confusion during the demonstration, only essential personnel will appear on stage and in documentation. I read that once, then again. I closed the file and turned off the monitor. The screen went black and the office reflected onto it, a ghosted version of itself where everything still sat in its place, except me. I opened my employment contract from my personal archive and scrolled to the section on professional development. The clause was short and clear. Engineers may maintain private environments for learning and continuous improvement, provided that no third party receives proprietary materials and provided that access to company systems is not compromised. I had insisted on that sentence on my first week, and no one had argued. Now it read like a door someone had forgot to lock. I made tea in the kitchen with water that never quite reached boiling. Steam curled from the mug like a thought trying to become language. The window over the sink looked into the conference room where I once spent a full night failing to fix a problem that did not belong to me. I smiled at the memory, not because it was happy, but because it was precise. Back at my desk, I opened a clean notebook. Paper felt honest in a way screens rarely do. I wrote a title at the top. Things that are mine. I listed nothing physical. No chair, no mug, no desk plant. My list contained verbs and patterns. The way queues should drain after a deployment. The order in which caches tolerate failure. The number of seconds a user will wait before trust begins to thin, then tear. When I finished the page, I dated the corner and closed the cover. I began to gather what was mine in the only way that mattered. I pulled commit histories, screenshots, architecture drafts that still carried the smudged corners of late nights. I exported logs that showed stability across storms I never mentioned in any meeting. I zipped the files and stored them where the contract allowed. None of it belonged to Helios as a trophy. All of it belonged to the truth as a record. The private terminal glowed to life beside the company machine. Lines of green text poured down like rain on glass. I watched a mirrored skeleton take shape as I typed the first commands for a learning environment that would understand me without permission. It was not a product. It was an answer to a question I had not been allowed to ask out loud. I paused and walked to the server room. The card reader flashed, then admitted me with its small electronic click. The air was cold and dry. I stood in the aisle and let the sound of the racks empty my head. There is a point in the night when time becomes a straight hallway. You can see the present and the future at once, and you can step toward either without moving. That is where I stood, with the machines breathing and the lights blinking like separate stars that drew one picture. On my way back, I passed the wall of framed patents that the company displayed like a polite museum. Most belonged to people who no longer worked here. Achievements eventually outlived the hands that made them. I traced one frame with a fingertip and wondered if stories outlive erasures. I decided they do when someone bothers to tell them. An alert pinged on the company chat. A junior engineer asked a question about a minor deployment. I typed a short answer and added a second line he did not ask for, a line that would save him time next week. He sent a grateful reply with a smiling face. I closed the chat and felt an old tenderness rise and fall. Teaching had always mattered to me. It still did. What I no longer had patience for was teaching those who used lessons as mirrors. I printed a single sheet and slipped it into a plain folder. The top line read resignation. Below that, a date and a sentence that was bare of decoration. I did not sign it, not yet. I did not believe in threats, only in decisions. The paper waited like a door set on steady hinges. At some point near midnight, the chief technology officer passed my desk. She had her coat over one arm and a stack of unsigned forms under the other. She stopped, considered something, then said only, "Try to get sleep." I nodded. She walked on. Not every witness needs to speak. Some of them just refuse to forget. The private environment finished provisioning. A small green message appeared. Ready? I leaned back and let the word settle. It felt like a clean room after a storm. I tested a simple sequence and watched it succeed. I tested a compound sequence and watched the system hold with quiet strength. My hands remembered everything. I checked my watch. The hour had crossed into the clean part of night when the city sounds thin and each noise feels chosen. I placed my phone face down on the desk. Do not disturb. The office looked as it always did. Chairs aligned, screens asleep, the distant blue of the emergency lights glowing at each exit. Yet something had shifted in the architecture of my thoughts. I felt less like a woman inside a company and more like a mind inside a map. Before leaving, I shut down the private terminal and cleaned my workspace as if a stranger might sit there in the morning and deserve a fair start. I wiped the ring of my mug from the desk. I filed the printed page. I took the old photograph from the drawer, the one where a small team stood under a banner that promised a future we believed we could build together. I slid it back, then closed the drawer and left it closed. In the elevator, I watched the floor numbers count down. They moved with a calm patience that did not match the pulse in my throat. The lobby lights were dim. The security guard looked up from a paperback and nodded. I stepped out into the cold and let the air find my face. The night smelled like salt and distance. On the drive home, I kept my eyes on the white lines. I thought about the words people use when they want ownership without weight. Streamline, consolidate, clarify, the words that had circled me all day. No one had used the word respect. It is an old word, heavy and clear. You know when it is absent. I reached my building and sat in the car for a minute, engine off, listening to the tick of cooling metal. Across the street, a bakery worker carried sacks of flour through a back door. Work continues, no matter the hour. Inside my apartment, I left the lights low and stood by the window. The bay lay dark and wide, the bridges traced in small jewels. I made notes on a card and laid it beside the keyboard. In the morning, I would rewrite my summary for the junior team, shorter, cleaner, kinder. If they were to inherit a difficult world, they deserved a map drawn with steady hands. When I went to bed, the city was still awake in places I could not see. I turned on the fan to make a soft wind that erased the edges of thought. As I closed my eyes, I did not replay insults or plan speeches. I pictured the diagram on the projector, the one that pretended not to know my name. Then I pictured the same diagram on a blank page, new ink, patient lines, a single author. I fell asleep inside that image, and the image held. The next morning, the office smelled of new coffee and ozone from the servers warming up. I arrived early, 2 hours before anyone else, because this floor belonged to those who keep it alive, and the living rarely sleep here. The hallways were empty, and the fluorescent light traced my shadow along the carpet like an obedient companion. At my desk, I opened the laptop I had reserved for private work. Its surface was cold, black, empty, except for the faint reflection of the morning sun. I typed the first command to bring the mirror system online. A cascade of green text appeared, quietly organizing itself into something I could trust. It was a reflection of Helios systems, line by line, folder by folder, function by function. The system pulsed softly like it knew it had been seen. No one else could access it. They would never see it. Yet it held everything, the patterns, the dependencies, the small, overlooked mistakes that formed the architecture's true backbone. Every command I had written over 5 years whispered back to me as the mirrored environment checked itself for integrity. Adrian arrived later, 2 hours after me, carrying the familiar scent of expensive cologne and an aura of overconfidence. He moved past my desk without a glance, straight to the conference room. The building seemed to bend slightly around him, employees following his shadow like obedient planets orbiting a bright sun. I opened a terminal and ran a verification script quietly. Every subsystem reported green. Every cue acknowledged the heartbeat. It was perfect, and yet it was invisible. That is the elegance of invisibility. It cannot be claimed by anyone but the one who watches. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, then typed a small command, just one line. It would create a dependency in the mirrored environment that would respond only to an unseen token. A timer, subtle, unremarkable to anyone else, set to activate in the future. 10:02 a.m. My small nod to precision. I did not smile. The system did not know the difference. The first hint of the twist rested there in plain view if anyone had known to look. A line of code that seemed ordinary, almost mundane, but it carried a promise. The system could function endlessly, but at that precise moment, it would do exactly what I intended. I documented the mirrored environment carefully, for my eyes only. Every folder name, every function, every integration. Nothing hidden from me, everything hidden from them. I could reconstruct the entire architecture from memory if I wanted. The world outside could burn. Inside this machine, order persisted. Around mid-morning, a new intern arrived. Leo, bright-eyed and nervous, carrying a laptop that was already too heavy for his small hands. He had been assigned to shadow me for the next few weeks. Adrian introduced him with exaggerated pride, gesturing to me like a magician revealing a prop. "Magnolia, this is Leo," he said. "He will follow your guidance. Make sure he understands the systems." I nodded and extended a hand. His grip was firm but uncertain. His eyes scanned me as if I were a problem to solve, which in a sense I was. I led him to my desk and began walking him through the architecture. Every explanation was clear, every detail precise. I watched him take notes, but I could see the gaps. He understood perhaps half of what I said. That was enough. As I spoke, I inserted subtle anomalies in the explanations, dependencies that sounded logical but would trigger only when combined incorrectly. Minor, almost invisible mistakes. Innocuous to anyone paying cursory attention, but vital to my plan. My words were a map and a warning, though he could not read it yet. I explained how authentication tokens flowed through the system, how queues managed themselves in failure scenarios, how load balancing responded to subtle spikes in traffic. Every statement was technically correct, yet designed to be navigated incorrectly if someone else tried to operate it without the context I had carried for years. Leo blinked at me after a pause. "So everything here, it just works?" "Yes," I said. "It works if you know it, otherwise it is unpredictable." I let the last word hang like a small riddle in the air. Adrian poked his head into the office, checking in. "Magnolia, are you ready for the team call?" "Yes," I said quietly. I wanted him to hear nothing else. As he left, the mirrored environment quietly hummed. I ran a final verification. Green lights, steady heartbeats, 10,000 lines of code aligned. One token was set to expire at 10:02 a.m. The system would respond exactly as I had planned. Nothing would be out of place. And yet everything would change. I leaned back and watched the sunrise spill across the floor. The first faint suspicion of dawn illuminated the mirrored architecture on my screen. It was subtle, almost invisible. A quiet twist hidden in plain sight. No one had noticed it yet. Not Adrian, not Leo, not anyone. And that was exactly how I wanted it. I turned my chair toward the window and rested my palms lightly on the desk. I did not feel excitement. I felt calm. I felt inevitability. This system, my creation, would speak in the language of consequences, and I would be listening from the shadows. The office began to fill slowly with people who thought they owned the morning. Footsteps echoed faintly in the hall. Coffee machines hissed. Phones rang in patterns designed to sound urgent. I remained in the quiet corner, watching the mirrored environment run in real time. The green lights on my terminal were steady, the lines of code blinking as though breathing. Leo, the intern, hovered at my elbow. "Magnolia, is this normal?" I looked at him and smiled, faint, controlled. "It is normal if you understand it. Otherwise, it is just a machine doing what you tell it." He nodded, unsure. I let him try a simple deployment command, watching his fingers hover above the keys like someone touching a fragile instrument. The system responded exactly as expected, smooth, precise, obedient. I had tested this 100 times, every behavior predictable, every outcome inevitable. As he worked, I inserted a minor dependency in the mirrored environment. Subtle enough that if anyone else tried to replicate it, the sequence would fail silently later, at the exact time I had chosen. My heart did not race. I did not need to watch. The system remembered my intent. I had already anticipated the motion of each variable. From my peripheral vision, I saw Adrian stride into the office. He moved with the confident pace of someone who thinks control is inherited rather than earned. Magnolia, he said brightly. Any questions for the demo today? I shook my head. Not yet. Good, I want everything perfect, he said. He glanced at Leo. You have a lot to learn from her. Then he left with his practiced smile, the same smile I had seen everyone believe before. I turned my attention back to the mirrored system. Every module, every function, every microservice was aligned. 10,000 lines of code, and everyone waited for its moment. A single token, set to expire at 10:02 a.m., would trigger the sequence I had built. It was precise, legal, and entirely inevitable. I ran a final verification script. Green, steady, perfect. Then I prepared a second set of documents for Leo. They contained technical instructions that were entirely correct but lacked the contextual understanding necessary to manage them fully. I knew he would follow them in good faith. That would be enough. A small notification appeared on the private terminal, a log error in a minor module. I examined it. It was the dependency I had inserted. The system acknowledged it silently, but it could not propagate. I smiled faintly. A small test, a quiet reminder. The twist had begun in invisible steps. Throughout the morning, I repeated small rituals. Adjusted cables, tested server responses, walked the aisles of the office, quietly noting how the machines interacted with the human operators. Every movement mattered. Every observation would be stored in memory. Every outcome could be predicted. At lunchtime, I walked down to the cafeteria. The light was harsh and the smell of reheated food mingled with coffee. People greeted me with polite nods, some whispered about the upcoming demo. Adrian had been speaking to anyone who would listen about his original design. I let them believe what they wanted. The system did not care. Neither did I. Back at my desk, I pulled a notebook from my bag. I wrote a single line: the stage is set. Timing is everything. I paused, then under it, a second line: 10:02 a.m., small enough that no one would notice, precise enough that it would not fail. Leo returned to ask a question about the workflow. I guided him carefully, pointing to modules, explaining function by function. Every explanation technically correct. Every sequence subtly directed toward the dependencies I had inserted. He would follow the instructions faithfully. That was the point. The system would obey. The humans would follow the path I had drawn unaware. By 3 p.m., the office felt warmer, more human. People laughed in small clusters. Phones pinged. Meetings were announced. Adrian ran past my office again, talking to himself as he rehearsed the demo, his gestures broad and confident. He did not notice the small light blinking on my private terminal, the sequence that would activate in precisely 79 minutes. I leaned back and watched. The mirrored environment hummed quietly, perfectly aligned. One token remained set. 10:02 a.m., the first hint of the twist rested there, hidden, precise, inevitable. I sipped coffee and allowed myself the faintest smile. The office could continue, oblivious. The board could believe the demo was safe. I did not correct them. That was the point. Evening fell. The sun slid behind the towers outside. Shadows crept across the polished floors of the office. I stood and walked to the server racks, resting a hand against cold metal. The hum of the machines was familiar, comforting. They knew me, they would obey me. They would tell the truth even when everyone else believed a lie. Before leaving, I sent a short message to myself. Do not forget the time. It will speak for everything. The twist was planted. Quiet, invisible, waiting. No one would see it coming because they had already chosen not to notice the signs. I left the office that night with the city lights reflecting in the windows. Adrian rehearsed, Leo followed instructions, the system hummed, and the token ticked down. Everything was ready. All that remained was to wait for 10:02 a.m., when silence would speak louder than any announcement, and the first domino would fall. The morning air was thin and metallic as I stepped into the office. Light spilled across the floor, slicing through the shadows of chairs and the occasional stray cable. The office had been alive for hours, but the hum of productivity was quiet, almost meditative. I moved to my desk and opened the private terminal first. The mirrored environment blinked awake, silent, and perfect. It waited. Leo arrived, looking eager but nervous. "Good morning, Magnolia," he said. His hands hovered over the keyboard like he was touching something fragile. "Good morning," I replied. "Ready for the walkthrough?" "Yes," he said, though his voice betrayed uncertainty. He had already seen my diagrams, read my notes, yet he did not understand the depth of what he was following. That was exactly how it should be. We started in the authentication module. I guided him carefully, step by step. Each explanation was precise and true, but I emphasized certain sequences more than necessary. I showed him the tokens, the queues, the failovers. I repeated minor instructions that seemed redundant but contained small traps, dependencies that would not be apparent until the critical moment. I watched his eyes follow the lines, trusting, and I allowed a faint nod here, a small smile there. Adrian passed by my office door with his usual flourish, speaking to a colleague about the upcoming investor demo. He waved in my direction, the smile of a man who believed visibility equaled control. He had no idea that I could watch every interaction, every sequence, every heartbeat of the system without stepping into the room. By mid-morning, the office was full. Phones rang with the urgency of the business world, printers churned out slides, and managers debated priorities. I walked past a group gathered around Adrian's desk, nodding politely as they discussed details that I already knew better than anyone. No one paused to acknowledge my presence. I let them believe I was invisible. That was the beauty of invisibility. It made manipulation effortless. I returned to my desk and reviewed the documentation Leo had begun filling in. Everything was technically correct, yet subtly incomplete in ways only I understood. I added a note here, a line there, guiding him towards safe execution but leaving the precise timing and dependencies hidden. He trusted me. He followed the path. The first subtle tremor of anticipation began in me. This was not chaos. This was order as it should be, the world unfolding according to a map only I held. Around noon, a junior engineer asked a question about server failover sequences. I answered calmly, walking him through each step. My voice was neutral, kind, even encouraging. I smiled faintly, and he nodded, unaware that each of his confirmations reinforced the path I had created, a path that would make everything collapse at the appointed time, legally, flawlessly, invisibly. Adrian wandered past again. He stopped briefly, checking his watch, and looked in my direction. I nodded politely, not raising my voice, not offering guidance. I did not need to. The system and its guardians were ready. He believed control was his, but he did not know how fragile the structure truly was. I prepared a small set of notes for Leo. They appeared mundane, a checklist of minor maintenance tasks. Everything was correct, everything functioned. And yet, if executed by anyone else without context, it would create the confusion necessary to make the final domino fall. By early afternoon, the energy in the office had shifted. People were moving faster, speaking louder, laughing occasionally. I stayed still, observing the patterns. Adrian rehearsed slides. Leo followed instructions. Engineers tested minor modules. Everything was in motion, and nothing of consequence was out of place. I returned to the mirrored environment and verified the token schedule one more time. 10:02 a.m., the exact moment. The system would perform precisely as designed. Not a second early, not a second late. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes briefly. Outside the window, the city pulsed. Cars moved in straight lines, lights reflected in the water. I imagined the moment the system would speak. It would not shout. It would simply stop acknowledging the commands they expected it to obey. That moment would be quiet, elegant, undeniable. I returned to Leo. "Everything seems to be in place," I said softly. "You understand your role?" He nodded earnestly. "Yes, but what if something goes wrong?" "Then you follow the instructions," I said. I let the faintest pause linger. "Exactly as written." No more, no less. The tension hung in the air. The trap was laid. I walked slowly to the window again, my hands on the sill. The mirrored towers across the street reflected the sun in harsh silver angles. Everything looked intact. Everything appeared normal. But the system and I shared a secret they could never perceive. When Adrian returned to check on Leo, he asked, "Everything under control?" "Yes," I said. And in that single word, I contained months of planning, years of observation, and a sequence that would only be understood at 10:02 a.m. The office continued its hum. Phones pinged. Conversations meandered. Slides were rehearsed. And I remained calm, patient, invisible. I glanced once more at the terminal. The lights blinked steadily. All modules green. Ready. Waiting. 10:02 a.m. The moment rested in its own heartbeat. No one else knew it existed. I smiled faintly. The trap in plain sight was complete. By mid-afternoon, the office had become a river of movement and sound. Phones rang, printers churned, and meetings spilled into hallways with clipped words and hurried gestures. I stayed at my desk, watching everything unfold like a conductor who did not need to touch an instrument. Leo approached with a new question, small but precise, about the order in which tasks should be executed in the new workflow. I guided him carefully, my explanations exact, my hands steady on the keyboard. Every word I spoke reinforced the steps I had laid out in the mirrored environment. Every confirmation he gave brought the system closer to the moment it would demonstrate its obedience not to him, but to me. Adrian passed by once more, this time checking the slides he had rehearsed on a separate screen. He nodded at Leo, unaware that every step the intern followed was part of a carefully orchestrated sequence. I watched him, silent, from across the room. His confidence was loud, almost deafening, but it masked nothing. He believed he was in control, but he could not see the invisible architecture guiding each minor move. I returned to my private terminal and verified the final conditions. All dependencies aligned perfectly. The token set for 10:02 a.m. remained untouched. Even a single misalignment would be obvious to anyone familiar with the system, yet everything was flawless. The mirrored environment was ready, waiting, patient, invisible. A small notification pinged on my terminal. A minor alert in one module that Adrian had been using as a reference for the demo. I checked it carefully. It was exactly as I expected. It would not trigger any immediate problem, but when combined with the sequence of events I had engineered, it would contribute to the precise failure that would unfold at the appointed hour. I leaned back in my chair and watched the office around me. The people were absorbed in their tasks. The sound of conversation and movement filled the room with a sense of ordinary energy. It was exactly the camouflage I needed. No one suspected that the entire sequence was being guided from my chair, by my hands, my decisions, my foresight. Leo returned with a printed checklist. He looked uncertain. "I just want to make sure I am doing everything right," he said. "You are," I replied softly. "Follow the instructions exactly. That is all you need to do." I smiled faintly. He nodded, reassured. I knew he would follow the steps faithfully, unknowingly reinforcing the trap I had created. Adrian returned to the office again, this time with 2 executives in tow. They discussed minor tweaks to the slides, minor adjustments to the timing of the demo. He spoke with practiced charm and authority, completely unaware that the system he trusted implicitly was about to betray him. I moved quietly through the office, checking cables, confirming module readiness, monitoring logs. Everything was aligned. Every component of the mirrored environment was ready to respond according to the plan I had designed. The office hummed with activity, oblivious to the quiet architecture controlling it. At 4 o'clock, I received a message from the Chief Technology Officer. She asked if I had completed the walkthrough with Leo. I replied with a simple confirmation. She thanked me and left it at that. Her message was brief, careful, respectful. She understood that some events could not be altered once they were set in motion. I returned to my terminal and ran a final verification script. Green lights across every module, heartbeat steady, dependencies aligned. 10:02 a.m. remained the key. The token was locked in. The sequence could not be altered by anyone else, not by Adrian, not by anyone in the office. It would unfold precisely as designed. I allowed myself a faint smile, the kind that does not require explanation. The trap was invisible, untraceable. It would operate silently, elegantly, and at the exact moment reveal the system's obedience not to authority, but to foresight. I stood and walked to the window. The sun was low now, casting long shadows across the polished floors. The city outside was oblivious to the subtle countdown within the office. Workers hurried to appointments, cars moved in rhythmic lines, lights glinted off distant towers. The world had no idea that at 10:02 a.m. everything would change. I leaned against the glass, resting my palms lightly. For months, I had built this trap piece by piece, quietly, invisibly, without fanfare. Every action, every lesson taught to Leo, every minor adjustment in the mirrored environment was a step toward this exact moment. No one would see it coming. No one could. The system would speak, not in words or alarms, but in the language of failure, perfectly timed, flawless, and undeniable. And I would be watching, patient, calm, invisible. I returned to my desk and reviewed the final checklist. Every step, every module, every line of code was accounted for. The office continued around me, oblivious to the careful orchestration beneath their feet. By 5 p.m., the office began to empty. Conversations slowed, chairs were pushed back, and the hum of activity softened. I closed my private terminal and stood. The trap was complete, waiting, ready, silent. Outside, the sun touched the tops of the towers, and the city held its breath for nothing. Inside, the stage was set for 10:02 a.m., the hour when silence would speak louder than any voice. The morning of the demo arrived with a brittle light. The city outside the Helios towers gleamed coldly, glass and steel reflecting a promise that had always been meant for someone else. I arrived early, as I always did, and the office was already stirring. Phones rang, printers churned, and the faint smell of reheated coffee lingered in the hallways. I walked to my desk, keeping my hands visible, my face calm. The mirrored environment waited silently on my private terminal. Green lights pulsed in quiet rhythm, perfect, patient, aligned. 10:02 a.m. remained locked in place. The token, the sequence, the dependencies, all precisely where they needed to be. Leo appeared at my elbow, bright-eyed and nervous. "Are we ready?" he asked. "We are," I said softly. "Everything is in place." He looked down at the checklist I had prepared for him, then back at the monitors. I want to make sure I do everything correctly," he said. "You will," I replied. "Follow the instructions exactly. Nothing more, nothing less." Adrian Keller entered then, the picture of confidence. He smiled at the interns, spoke to executives, rehearsed gestures he believed conveyed control. The office hummed around him. Phones pinged. Slides flashed on monitors. Everyone believed the show was his. I remained in my corner, hands on the keyboard, calm, invisible. The mirrored environment waited. The sequence was set. The trap lay hidden in plain sight, a small token that no one noticed, a dependency that no one understood. Everything depended on timing, patience, and the oblivion of those who thought they were in charge. Investors arrived, their presence sharp and urgent. Cameras recorded slides that glittered with numbers, charts, and promises. Adrian spoke smoothly, describing the system, its supposed innovations, the speed and elegance of its operation. Everyone nodded, impressed, unaware that the system's true behavior had already been predetermined. Leo followed instructions meticulously, unaware of the subtle dependencies I had seeded. Every command he executed reinforced the eventual sequence. He believed he was assisting, learning, participating. He did not know he was complicit in the unveiling of precision, not failure. At 9:55, I sent the email I had drafted days before, a formal resignation. It slid into the inbox of HR, time-stamped and precise, without emotion, without flourish. The office did not notice. Adrian continued speaking to a group of investors, his gestures wide and rehearsed, his confidence unbroken. I leaned back in my chair and watched. The mirrored environment pulsed in quiet green. The token ticked closer to the appointed time. 10:02 a.m., the system would perform exactly as designed. Every module would respond correctly according to the invisible architecture I had maintained. Every human operator would follow steps that seemed logical, unaware that the sequence was aligned for a single, decisive consequence. A minor alert appeared on a display Adrian used as reference. A cue had shifted slightly, a microsecond delay, nothing noticeable to anyone else. I allowed it to pass. It was part of the sequence, a subtle reminder that the system would act according to its own rules, not the authority above it. The room buzzed with energy. Investors leaned forward in their chairs. Slides changed, charts updated. Adrian's voice carried through the room, smooth, practiced. Everyone expected perfection. And that was when it began. The first subtle deviation appeared on the main dashboard. A process that should have acknowledged a command did not. A log entry remained unrecorded. It was small, almost invisible. Only I noticed it. I did not react. I did not need to. The system was beginning to speak in the language I had designed, quiet, precise, undeniable. Leo looked up from his terminal. I think something is happening," he whispered. I nodded slightly. "Yes," I said. "It is behaving as it should." The room continued in oblivion. Phones pinged. Slides changed. Adrian spoke confidently, unaware that the first thread of the sequence I had set was unraveling perfectly. Every dependency I had seeded was now activating, invisible, unnoticed. I watched the monitors as a log entry appeared, a minor failure triggered in one module. Green lines flashed red briefly, then returned to green. Everyone would assume it was a glitch. I knew better. It was the opening move, the first domino, and it had been executed flawlessly. The mirrored environment remained hidden, unwavering. I had designed it to respond silently, elegantly, perfectly. 10:02 a.m. had not yet arrived, yet the system was already beginning to reveal its obedience to the plan, not to authority. I leaned back in my chair and took a slow breath. The office continued its hum. Adrian gestured, smiling, unaware. Investors nodded, impressed. Leo followed instructions, unknowingly reinforcing the sequence. The first signs of consequence had begun, invisible to everyone but me, and that was all that mattered. The clock ticked toward 10. The office felt like a theater full of people unaware of the play already written. Phones chimed, slides flickered, and Adrian spoke with the confidence of someone convinced control was absolute. Everyone believed the system was perfect. They had no reason to think otherwise. Leo continued following instructions meticulously, carefully. Each step he took, each command executed, reinforced the hidden dependencies I had designed. He believed he was participating in success. He did not know he was activating a sequence designed to reveal truth, not failure. The mirrored environment on my private terminal hummed quietly, every line of code aligned, every token ready. 10:02 a.m. approached with a silent inevitability. I watched it in stillness, hands folded, eyes calm. The green lights pulsed with the rhythm of anticipation I alone could measure. A minor alert blinked briefly on Adrian's monitor. A cue was delayed by microseconds. He glanced at it, shrugged, and continued. The investors leaned in, nodding at his words, unaware. The first subtle deviation had appeared, almost invisible, a whisper of what was coming. I sipped my coffee slowly, tasting bitterness and clarity in equal measure. My reflection in the screen looked back at me calm, assured. The token counted down silently. 10:01, 10:01 and 30 seconds. Adrian gestured at the slide showing live system performance. As you can see, he said, the Phoenix architecture responds instantly to all inputs, flawlessly and predictably. Our deployment times have been cut in half. Our redundancy is seamless. Our scaling is, the lights on one module blinked. A green line on the dashboard paused, then vanished. Silence stretched, a fraction of a second. No one noticed. I did. I tapped a key gently on my terminal. Everything remained aligned. The mirrored system executed its hidden dependencies with precision, each step invisible, each reaction contained within the architecture. 10:02 a.m. arrived. The main system log lit up red briefly, then stabilized. A minor failure propagated to the dashboard. Adrian's confident smile faltered for the barest instant. "What is that?" he asked, though no one else noticed. I watched the sequence unfold exactly as I had designed it. The failure was small, correctable, undeniable. The system had responded precisely to the hidden dependencies I had seeded. Every command they expected it to acknowledge had been processed correctly in my mirrored logic, but the visible interface now reflected subtle deviations. The investors murmured. Phones pinged with alerts from devices monitoring the demo. Adrian waved his hand, trying to mask uncertainty. "Just a minor glitch," he said. "Nothing to worry about." I remained calm, silent, invisible. The mirrored system hummed, green lines pulsing steadily, obeying only the logic I had written, not the authority above it. A second alert appeared. More lines blinked red briefly, then returned to green. Leo looked up, eyes wide. "Magnolia, is this supposed to happen?" "Yes," I said softly. "Exactly as it should." Adrian glanced at the screen, then at the investors, then back at me, searching for a handhold, a hint, a solution. None came. The sequence was flawless, invisible, inevitable. The first wave of consequences had begun. The office continued its hum, unaware that the truth was unfolding in plain sight. Every minor error, every subtle deviation, was a reflection of the system's obedience not to him, but to me. By 10:03, the dashboard began to display cascading corrections. Lines that had blinked red returned to green, processed by the mirrored environment I alone controlled. Adrian adjusted slides, whispered to his assistant, tried to reassure the room. He did not understand. No one could. I leaned back, hands folded. My reflection was calm, serene. The office believed the demo had succeeded, that the system was behaving perfectly. They were partially correct. The system had followed instructions, but whose instructions? The answer was mine. Leo turned to me, hesitating. "So, it's working?" "Yes," I said. "It is working exactly as intended." I closed my eyes briefly, letting the moment sink. This was the first visible proof of the trap, the first acknowledgement that the sequence I had set would execute silently, elegantly, and invisibly. The room would never know the truth. Only I would. Adrian continued to speak, trying to mask the unease creeping into his tone. He adjusted the slides, smiled at investors, explained performance metrics. Everyone else nodded, impressed, unaware. They had no idea who was truly guiding the architecture. The mirrored environment hummed, obedient and unseen, every token and dependency perfectly aligned. 10:02 had passed. The first subtle collapse had occurred. Everything was moving according to plan, and I had done nothing overt. I leaned back in my chair and exhaled slowly. The trap was in motion. The office believed the illusion of control. I held the reality. And that was all that mattered. The office felt suddenly smaller. Phones buzzed, emails pinged, and a low murmur ran through the room. What had seemed a flawless demonstration only minutes before was now unraveling in ways no one anticipated. Investors leaned forward, murmuring, whispering into phones. The confidence that had filled the air like perfume evaporated almost immediately. Adrian's gestures, once precise and commanding, began to falter. His hands rose to adjust slides, then fell uncertainly. He scanned the room, seeking reassurance from colleagues who looked as bewildered as he felt. There were no solutions to offer. Every indicator, every monitor, every dashboard pointed to anomalies, subtle and yet undeniable. Leo froze at his terminal. I think there is something wrong, he whispered. He looked at me, seeking guidance. I leaned slightly forward, voice calm, measured. Yes, I said. The system is showing exactly what it was designed to show. His eyes widened. He did not understand, and he did not need to. Understanding was a privilege that had been quietly withdrawn from all except me. Adrian's voice rose in pitch as he tried to regain control. This cannot be happening, he said. He adjusted his tie, shifted weight from foot to foot. Investors looked at him, their expressions tightening, eyebrows knitting together. The first module to fail had been minor. A queue that should have acknowledged a token had paused just long enough to trigger a ripple across dependent services. The dashboard reflected red alerts that blinked for brief moments, then resolved. No catastrophe, no immediate collapse, yet the room knew something had changed. The air felt heavier. Confidence was gone. I watched quietly. Hands folded, posture relaxed. Nothing I had done had been visible, yet the consequences of months of preparation were now making themselves apparent. I felt only clarity, a serene awareness that order and precision could be more powerful than force or confrontation. Adrian called out to a junior engineer. Check the logs, now, how is this possible? The engineer scrolled quickly, eyes widening. Sir, everything appears correct, the commands executed as expected. I don't see why these alerts appeared. Adrian's face paled slightly. He tried to speak again, but his words stumbled over the rising tension. The room was no longer under his control. Every eye that had been focused on his confidence now tracked anomalies he could not explain. I opened my private terminal and observed the mirrored environment. Every alert, every small deviation, every token expiration was unfolding according to plan. The first domino had fallen. Everything was functioning perfectly, yet perfectly in alignment with the silent architecture only I had maintained. Investors began murmuring among themselves, leaning into their phones. Comments traveled fast. The word glitch spread through whispered conversations and quiet emails. Confidence eroded incrementally. Adrian tried to reassert authority, but every intervention was met with minor inconsistencies elsewhere. A second queue failed. A log entry did not appear where expected. Minor, nearly invisible, yet the room reacted. The subtle imbalance was enough to seed doubt, and doubt spread faster than technical faults ever could. Leo turned to me, almost trembling. What should we do? I tilted my head slightly. Nothing, I said. Just observe, let it unfold. It will resolve exactly as it is supposed to. Adrian's voice rose again, now bordering panic. Call the support team. Anyone, where is the backup? No one responded fast enough. Every attempt to intervene was slowed, subtly, by the dependencies I had seeded in the mirrored environment and reflected in the live system. It was like watching a tightrope walk, the rope invisible to all but the one who knew its tension. The room grew louder, yet Adrian's control diminished. Investors whispered among themselves, checking devices, comparing metrics, noting discrepancies. The board's faces were a mixture of disbelief and curiosity, unease shadowing their expressions. I remained calm. Hands folded, eyes steady. Everything I had planned, every careful insertion of dependencies, every precise calculation, was now manifesting. The first public consequences were unfolding exactly according to the sequence I had designed. In the corner, a small server indicator blinked red, then green, then red again. Minor fluctuations, barely noticeable, yet enough to seed the perception of instability. The investors' murmurs grew louder, their questions sharper. Adrian flailed, gesturing at the screens, pointing at the dashboards, trying to assert authority. His commands went unanswered, his control no longer absolute. Leo's hands trembled as he followed the instructions I had set. Every action he took, every step along the workflow, reinforced the outcome I had intended. He believed he was contributing to the solution. He was, just not in the way anyone expected. I leaned back in my chair, watching the rhythm of the office, the rise and fall of confidence, the subtle cracks appearing in the illusion of control. The mirrored environment hummed quietly beside me, invisible yet omnipresent. Every alert, every sequence, every microfailure was a note in the quiet symphony I had orchestrated. By 10:15, the room had shifted. Confidence had given way to uncertainty. The investors leaned forward, asking questions, scanning screens, whispering into phones. Adrian's voice trembled as he attempted to reassure the room. The junior engineers were confused. Leo looked to me, waiting for guidance, and I remained still. Calm, invisible, patient. The collapse had begun. By 10:30, the office had transformed into a subtle battlefield. The hum of machines no longer felt reassuring. Every monitor, every dashboard, every sequence seemed to carry a hidden message. Something was off. The investors' expressions hardened, their murmurs became pointed questions. Confidence was evaporating. Adrian ran between terminals, his gestures sharp, desperate. Check the logs, verify the tokens, where is the discrepancy? His voice carried panic for the first time in weeks, though he tried to mask it with urgency. The junior engineers scrambled. Phones pinged with messages from remote monitoring stations. Leo followed instructions without deviation, unaware that his actions were perfectly aligned with the sequence I had orchestrated. He was executing the trap without realizing it. Minor errors propagated across dashboards. Notifications blinked red briefly, then resolved, then blinked again in a different module. Nothing catastrophic, yet the human perception of control shattered. Every step Adrian attempted to correct only revealed further inconsistencies, subtle but undeniable. Investors leaned forward, whispering into phones. A few murmured about risks, about management, about whether the system had been stress-tested properly. Each whisper, each glance, chipped away at the illusion of authority Adrian had maintained. I remained calm, hands folded, eyes steady on the terminal. Every micro-failure, every hidden dependency, every token expiration was unfolding exactly as I had designed. The mirrored environment hummed quietly beside me, obedient, precise, invisible. Adrian tried to redirect attention to performance metrics, pointing at a line of data, explaining fluctuations as minor. The board nodded, hesitating, unsure. Their confidence faltered. He gestured at Leo, seeking reassurance, guidance, control. The intern was calm, obedient, following instructions precisely, reinforcing the sequence. By 10:45, the room was tense. Every employee, every investor, every executive was reacting to anomalies they could see but not understand. Minor alerts continued to blink. Modules reported micro-errors that resolved themselves in ways that made sense to no one except me. I sipped coffee slowly, watching the subtle chaos unfold. It was precise, elegant, inevitable. This was not destruction, it was revelation. The system was performing perfectly, yet it exposed the fragility of human assumptions, the illusion of control that Adrian had relied upon. Adrian's voice cracked. Why isn't the replication working? Why are the logs showing inconsistencies? What is happening? The engineers hesitated. None had an answer. The system continued humming quietly, green lines pulsing beside me, obeying only the architecture I had maintained. The mirrored environment held every thread of logic. Every failure was a reflection of what happens when control is assumed but not understood. Investors exchanged glances, checking devices, whispering among themselves. They could see the indicators, the warnings, the inconsistencies. They felt the tremor in confidence. Adrian's authority, once absolute, was unraveling in real time. I leaned back in my chair, letting the moment settle. There was no triumph, no satisfaction, only clarity. The sequence I had set was operating flawlessly. The system was obeying its design. And the humans, blind to the architecture they relied upon, were revealing themselves. By 11, the collapse was complete. The minor alerts, subtle dependencies, and hidden tokens had done their work. Investor confidence had faltered. Adrian's authority was publicly undermined. Junior engineers followed instructions perfectly, yet their obedience only magnified the exposure of systemic fragility. The mirrored environment continued humming quietly, green, and perfect. Every token, every dependency, every sequence remained aligned with my design. No one could touch it. No one could correct it. The system had spoken, not with alarms or errors, but with precise obedience that revealed truth. I stood, hands resting lightly on the desk. The office was a tableau of tension, confusion, and subdued panic. The investors would leave with questions. Adrian would leave with humiliation. Leo would leave with lessons he did not yet understand. I walked toward the window, watching the city outside. Cars moved in straight lines, lights reflected on glass, and the world remained unaware of the architecture of consequences quietly operating in the room below. I whispered to myself, almost inaudibly, the collapse was never theirs to prevent. And with that, I closed the terminal and stepped back, invisible, patient, unmoved. The first wave of consequences had passed. The system had performed flawlessly. The office believed in chaos, but the truth had been quietly orchestrated by one person who was unseen, unheard, yet entirely present. The office was quieter than I expected the next morning. Phones still pinged, but the urgency had shifted. Emails from investors requested clarification. Executives whispered in corners. Adrian moved like a man trying to recover, but his movements were measured, careful, hesitant, a shadow of authority. I arrived early as always. The mirrored environment had been shut down safely the night before, its sequences completed. Every dependency had executed as intended. Every alert had triggered, resolved, and confirmed the inevitability I had designed. Leo greeted me hesitantly. "Are you okay?" he asked. His voice was tentative, unsure of how to address someone who had orchestrated a controlled chaos without anyone knowing. "I am," I said softly. "Everything is as it should be." He nodded, glancing at the monitors, still showing traces of minor alerts that had persisted from yesterday. "It's impressive," he admitted. "I don't understand it fully, but—" He trailed off, the words unspoken, the awe clear. Adrian walked past my desk. He did not meet my eyes. He did not need to. Every glance around the room confirmed what he already knew in some corner of his mind. The illusion of control had failed, elegantly, quietly, without a single overt move from me. I leaned against the window and watched the city stretch in the morning light. Traffic moved, reflections glimmered on steel towers, pedestrians hurried along sidewalks, oblivious to the drama that had unfolded in a single office. The world continued, unchanged and unaware. Emails pinged quietly. A message from the CEO requested a meeting. Another from a senior investor asked for a debrief. None of them would understand the truth. That was as it should be. I packed my bag slowly, deliberately, taking nothing that belonged to anyone else. The mirrored environment, the sequence, the precise timing of every token, all remained my secret. The truth resided only in the architecture I had maintained, invisible to all but me. At the elevator, I paused, resting my palm on the cool metal. For years, I had worked quietly, carefully, without recognition. Now recognition was unnecessary. The consequences of my actions had already been demonstrated, quietly, without fanfare, without acknowledgement. Leo approached, carrying a printed report. "You're leaving?" he asked. His voice carried a mixture of curiosity and respect, unspoken understanding. "Yes," I said. "I have accomplished what I needed to." He hesitated. Will anyone know what really happened?" I smiled faintly. "Perhaps one day, but not today, not here. That is the way of things." The elevator doors opened. I stepped inside and allowed them to close behind me. The floor numbers counted down silently, steadily, like a metronome marking a rhythm only I could feel. I exited the building into the crisp morning air. The sun reflected in glass towers, streets glimmered, and the world moved with ordinary grace. The weight of the office, the expectations, the invisible structures I had maintained, all stayed behind. I carried only the knowledge of precision, inevitability, and subtle justice. I walked to my car and paused at the edge of the sidewalk. For a moment, I looked back. The building stood gleaming, unbroken, unaware that its foundation had been tested, its confidence quietly dismantled. I slipped into the driver's seat. The mirrored environment hummed silently in memory, like a heartbeat echoing in an empty room. I started the engine, the vibrations steady beneath me, and merged into traffic, unseen, unnoticed, free. By mid-morning, the first news alerts began to circulate. Helios had experienced anomalies during the Phoenix demo. Investors requested debriefs. Executives scrambled for answers. Adrian had been publicly undermined, his authority diminished. Every eye that had trusted his certainty now questioned it, yet no one could trace the cause. I allowed the car to glide along the streets, watching the sunlight trace reflections across the bay. I thought of Leo, of the junior engineers, of the investors. Each had played their part faithfully in the sequence I had orchestrated. None realized the orchestration existed. None would. I opened my notebook and wrote a single line: "The system speaks only when you listen carefully. Otherwise, it is silent." I paused, watching the water, thinking about precision, inevitability, and the quiet satisfaction of unseen control. The world had moved as it always did, and I had moved with it. I had left no traces, taken no trophies, required no recognition. The collapse had been subtle, elegant, undeniable. The office believed it was chaos. I knew it was exactitude. I placed the notebook in the passenger seat, and the city unfolded before me. Every reflection in the glass, every glint of sunlight on metal, was a reminder that consequences travel quietly when they are designed with care. I whispered to myself, almost without sound, 10:02. The moment is complete. And for the first time in years, I smiled completely, fully, unseen, invisible, and entirely free. The traffic moved steadily along the bay. I kept my eyes on the white lines, breathing in the early morning air that carried the faint salt of the water. The city had no idea what had occurred inside the Helios Towers. No one knew how fragile the illusion of control had been, or how precise a hand had guided the events from the shadows. I stopped at a small cafe near the waterfront. The bell above the door chimed as I entered, a soft note against the low murmur of early patrons. I ordered black coffee, no sugar. The steam rose like a delicate veil, carrying warmth to my hands. I took a seat by the window and watched the sunlight ripple across the water. A notification blinked on my phone, an email from Leo, brief and tentative. "Thank you, I think I understand now." I smiled faintly and typed a response. "You observed carefully. That is enough." I did not elaborate. Understanding, like justice, sometimes arrives silently. The mirrored environment existed only in memory now, untouched, preserved. Every token, every dependency, every sequence had executed perfectly. Helios had experienced the consequences of its own assumptions. Adrian had been exposed, publicly undermined, and yet the details of what truly transpired were invisible to all but me. I sipped my coffee and let the city breathe around me. The sound of distant horns, footsteps, and water lapping against the pier created a rhythm that matched the calm inside me. There was no victory to announce, no applause to claim. The work had been completed, the lesson delivered, and justice rendered without spectacle. A journalist's email appeared in my inbox, asking for comments about the Phoenix demo. I did not respond. The story would write itself. The sequence of events, precise and undeniable, would speak louder than any words I could provide. I opened a notebook and began writing. Lines flowed, describing the architecture, the sequences, the invisible mechanisms that had guided the office towards subtle revelation. I wrote not for recognition, but for permanence, a record of precision and foresight, a testament to quiet authority. The sunlight shifted, illuminating a small puddle on the pavement outside the cafe. I watched the reflection of the towers ripple across it, fractured, shifting, impermanent. The office, the investors, Adrian, the engineers, all reflected, none permanent. Only the architecture remained, silent, exact, obedient. I thought briefly of Leo. He had participated without knowing, learning, observing. One day he might understand, but that was not my concern. Understanding is a privilege granted by observation, patience, and clarity. I closed the notebook and placed it carefully beside me. My coffee was cool now. I felt neither regret nor triumph, only the satisfaction of inevitability. The office and its inhabitants would continue. Investors would request explanations. Executives would rebuild confidence. Adrian would move forward, marked by subtle failure, yet oblivious to the true cause. The sequence had spoken. I had observed. Silence had prevailed. I stood and left the cafe, stepping into the sunlight fully. The wind carried the faint scent of water and metal. I walked toward the bridge, toward a horizon that was entirely my own. Before leaving, I glanced once more at the notebook. On the cover, written in faint ink, a single line, 10:02 a.m., it was all that mattered. I whispered softly, almost to myself, almost to the city. They wanted me gone, I was gone, and I took everything with me. The world continued unaware. I merged into the streets, invisible yet entirely present. The mirrored environment, the architecture, the subtle consequences all remained. They would continue to unfold in ways the world would never fully grasp. I pressed my palms lightly against the steering wheel, feeling the vibration of the engine beneath me. I had done my work. I had delivered precision, inevitability, and subtle justice without fanfare. As the bridge loomed ahead, sunlight glinting off the steel, I let myself exhale fully. I was free, and the city had no idea.